In an upscale restaurant packed with diners, a woman in expensive clothing suddenly stood up. The chandelier light caught the diamond ring on her hand as her arm rose high in the air, aimed directly at the male waiter standing before her. The entire room held its breath. No one intervened. No one dared speak. Everyone believed the next moment would bring the familiar humiliation of a slap. But in that exact second, the single-father waiter did something no one expected, and within minutes, the entire restaurant fell into a chilling silence. What really happened? The grandeur didn't look like the kind of place where people raised their voices. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, casting warm light across white tablecloths and polished silverware. The Friday evening crowd filled nearly every table, their conversations blending into a low hum of wealth and comfort. Waiters moved between tables with practiced efficiency, their black vests crisp and their smiles professional. This was the kind of restaurant where a single dinner could cost several $100s, where reservations were made weeks in advance, and where the unspoken rule was simple. The customer was always right, and the staff always bowed their heads. Ryan Cole had worked at the Grandeur for 5 years, long enough to know exactly how the game was played. He understood that his job wasn't just about bringing food from the kitchen to the table. It was about making wealthy people feel important, about accepting complaints with a smile, about never showing frustration no matter how unreasonable the demand. He had mastered the art of invisibility, of being present without being noticed, of absorbing insults without flinching. At 32 years old, he had learned that survival sometimes meant swallowing pride. Tonight was no different from most Friday nights. Ryan moved through his section with quiet efficiency, refilling water glasses and clearing plates. Around 9 o'clock, he glanced at his watch and pulled out his phone during a brief moment in the kitchen. His son would be asleep by now. He typed quickly, "Good night, buddy. Love you." Then he slipped the phone back into his pocket and returned to the dining room. These were the calculations of a single father who worked the evening shift because it paid better, who counted every hour against the cost of childcare and rent, who couldn't afford to lose this job. Lauren Whitmore sat at table 12 with 3 business associates, her posture radiating the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. She was a woman in her early 40s who ran a real estate development company, the kind of person who treated restaurants like extensions of her office. Ryan had served her before. She always ordered the most expensive items on the menu and always had special requests. Tonight she wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Ryan made in a month, and a diamond ring that caught the light every time she gestured. Her guests listened attentively as she spoke, nodding at the right moments, laughing at her jokes. This dinner was clearly about impressing them, about demonstrating power. When Sarah, the new server, came to take the order from table 12, Ryan noticed her hands shaking slightly as she wrote in her notepad. Sarah had only been working at the Grandeur for 2 weeks, and she was still learning to navigate the pressure. Lauren ordered a Wagyu steak, rare, with specific instructions. No black pepper, extra garlic butter. Sarah nodded, wrote quickly, and headed back toward the kitchen. Ryan didn't think much of it at the time. He had his own tables to manage, his own orders to deliver. 40 minutes later, the kitchen bell rang, and Ryan saw Sarah's order waiting under the heat lamps. The Wagyu steak sat on a white plate, perfectly seared, with a small ramekin of garlic butter on the side. Ryan picked it up and carried it toward table 12, weaving between chairs and conversations. He had delivered 1,000 meals exactly like this one. As he approached Lauren's table, he noticed the thin dusting of black pepper across the surface of the meat. His eyes flickered to the kitchen ticket clipped to the edge of the plate, checking the order details one final time before serving. Ryan set the plate down in front of Lauren with a polite nod. Her eyes went to the steak immediately, and her face changed. The pleasant expression she had been wearing for her guests disappeared, replaced by something cold and sharp. She stared at the pepper, then looked up at Ryan. Her voice came out flat and controlled, but loud enough that nearby tables could hear. "I said no black pepper." Ryan kept his expression neutral and his voice respectful. He had handled complaints like this dozens of times before. The key was to stay calm, to acknowledge the problem, to fix it quickly. "I apologize, ma'am. Let me check with the kitchen about the order." Lauren cut him off before he could finish. Her voice rose, and the conversations at surrounding tables began to fade. People turned to look. "Check with the kitchen? Don't you know how to do your job? Or did you think I was joking when I gave my order?" Ryan felt the weight of dozens of eyes on him. This was the moment where he was supposed to apologize again, to take the plate back, to promise to make it right. That was the script. But something in Lauren's tone, in the way she looked at him like he was less than human, made him hesitate. He opened his mouth to respond, but she wasn't finished. "You just made me look incompetent in front of my guests. Do you understand that? Do you have any idea what that costs me?" One of her business associates, an older man in a navy suit, frowned at the plate. A woman across from him glanced away uncomfortably. Lauren seemed to notice their reactions, and Ryan saw something shift in her expression. She wasn't just angry about the pepper. She was angry about losing face, about appearing less than perfect in front of people she needed to impress. And she needed someone to blame. Lauren stood up slowly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. The sound cut through the dining room, and more heads turned. The entire restaurant seemed to be watching now, waiting to see what would happen next. Ryan stood very still, the empty tray balanced in his left hand. He could see the manager, Richard, standing near the entrance, too far away to intervene quickly. He could see Sarah in the corner, her face pale, as she realized something had gone wrong with her order. He could see the other diners, some with phones already in their hands, filming. Lauren's voice dropped to something quieter but infinitely more dangerous. She spoke slowly, emphasizing each word so that everyone could hear. "You made me lose face in front of my clients. You understand what that means, don't you? There are consequences." She raised her hand, and Ryan understood immediately what was about to happen. He had seen it before, in other restaurants, with other customers. The raised hand, the public humiliation. The assumption that someone in his position would simply stand there and take it. The room seemed to hold its breath. No one moved to stop her. No one said a word. The unspoken rule was in effect. The customer was always right, no matter what they did. But Ryan didn't step back. He didn't lower his eyes. He didn't bow his head and wait for the impact. Instead, in the split second before Lauren's hand could reach his face, he raised his own hand and caught her wrist in midair. His grip was firm but not aggressive, just enough to stop the motion. The restaurant froze. Lauren's eyes widened in shock, her mouth opening slightly. She had never been stopped before. No one had ever dared. Ryan looked directly into her eyes, and when he spoke, his voice was calm and clear, loud enough for everyone to hear, but without a trace of anger. "I'm happy to apologize for the meal, but I will not allow anyone to touch me." The silence that followed was absolute. Lauren stood there with her wrist still caught in Ryan's hand, her face flushing red with a mixture of rage and genuine shock. For perhaps the first time in years, someone had drawn a line she couldn't cross. Around them, the other diners stared, some with their phones raised, others simply frozen in disbelief. This wasn't supposed to happen. Waiters didn't say no. They didn't defend themselves. They certainly didn't physically stop a customer from slapping them. Ryan released Lauren's wrist and took one step back, his expression still calm, his hands now at his sides. Lauren remained standing, her chest rising and falling quickly as she struggled to process what had just occurred. Her voice came out shaky, almost stuttering. You dare?" Richard was already moving towards them, his face pale with panic. Ryan could see it in the manager's eyes. This was bigger than a complaint about Pepper. This was the kind of incident that could destroy careers, that could end up on social media, That could cost the restaurant its reputation. But Ryan didn't look away from Lauren. He had crossed a line, and there was no going back now. The only question was what would happen next. The air in the grandeur felt thick and frozen, as if the entire building was waiting for someone to move, to speak, to break the terrible silence that had descended over table 12. Richard reached table 12 within seconds, his polished shoes clicking rapidly against the hardwood floor. His face had gone from its usual professional calm to something approaching panic. He positioned himself between Ryan and Lauren, his hands raised slightly, as if trying to physically separate two fighters. His eyes darted between them, trying to assess the damage, trying to figure out how to contain this before it exploded beyond repair. "Mrs. Whitmore, I sincerely apologize for any inconvenience. Please, let me handle this situation personally." Richard's voice carried the practiced smoothness of someone who had spent years managing crises. But Ryan could hear the strain underneath. The manager turned slightly toward Ryan, and his expression shifted into something harder. He gripped Ryan's elbow and steered him away from the table, his fingers tight enough to leave an impression. They moved toward the hallway that led to the kitchen, away from the dining room's direct line of sight, but not far enough that people couldn't still watch if they wanted to. Richard's whisper came out harsh and urgent, his face inches from Ryan's. "Are you out of your mind? Do you have any idea who that is? Mrs. Whitmore spends $50,000 a year at this restaurant. 50,000? She brings clients here twice a week, and you just grabbed her in front of everyone." Ryan kept his voice low but steady. He could feel his heart pounding, could feel the adrenaline still coursing through his system, but he forced himself to stay calm. This was the moment that would determine everything. If he backed down now, if he apologized and begged for his job, he would be doing it for the rest of his life. Not just here, but everywhere. Some lines, once crossed, changed you permanently. "I didn't grab her. I stopped her from hitting me. There's a difference." Richard's face flushed red. He glanced back towards the dining room, where Lauren still stood at her table, her business associates gathered around her in concern. Several other diners had their phones out, some openly recording, others pretending not to while they captured every moment. This was already out of control. Richard turned back to Ryan, his voice dropping even lower. "Listen to me very carefully. If you don't go back out there right now and apologize, you're finished. Not just here. I'll make sure every restaurant in this city knows what happened. You'll never work in hospitality again." Ryan thought about his son, about the bills that would come due next week, about the fact that this job was the only thing keeping them afloat. He thought about all the times he had swallowed insults, accepted blame for mistakes he didn't make, smiled while customers treated him like he was invisible. He thought about what kind of example he was setting for a 7-year-old boy who still believed his father could protect him from anything. "I'll apologize for the mistake with the meal, but I won't apologize for defending myself. She was going to slap me in front of 100 people, and I stopped her. That's not assault. That's self-defense." Richard stared at him for a long moment, and Ryan could see the calculation happening behind the manager's eyes. Richard was weighing the cost of losing a customer who spent $50,000 a year against the cost of defending an employee who had just violated the industry's most fundamental rule. The answer was obvious. It had always been obvious. "Get your things and go home. We'll discuss this tomorrow morning. Right now, I need you out of this dining room before you make things worse." Before Ryan could respond, a voice cut through the tension. It was small and shaky, coming from behind them. Both men turned to see Sarah standing at the edge of the hallway, her eyes red and her hands trembling. She looked like she might collapse, but she forced herself to step forward, toward the dining room, toward table 12. Ryan moved to stop her, but she shook her head. "It was my fault. I took the order. I forgot to write down the part about no pepper." Sarah's voice grew louder as she walked back into the main dining area, loud enough that people at nearby tables could hear her. Lauren turned, her expression still twisted with rage, and Sarah approached with her hands clasped in front of her, like a child about to be punished. When she spoke again, her voice cracked. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm so sorry. I was the one who took your order, and I didn't write down all your instructions. Ryan was just bringing out what the kitchen made. This is my mistake, not his." For a moment, Ryan thought this might actually work. Sarah was giving Lauren an out, a way to redirect her anger towards someone else, someone who was admitting fault. But Lauren's face didn't soften. If anything, she looked even more furious. She turned her gaze from Sarah to Ryan and back again, her voice rising with each word. "So both of you are incompetent. Is that what you're telling me? One of you can't take an order correctly, and the other one doesn't know how to check what he's serving. And when I try to address this disaster, I get physically assaulted by a member of your staff." The word assault hung in the air like a grenade. Ryan felt the shift immediately. Lauren wasn't just angry anymore. She was building a case, constructing a narrative that would justify whatever punishment she wanted to inflict. Several diners who had been watching with mild interest suddenly leaned forward, their expressions changing. This wasn't just a complaint about food anymore. This was something potentially criminal. Lauren pointed directly at Ryan, her finger shaking with emotion. "He grabbed my wrist. He put his hands on me without my permission. That's assault. I want both of them fired immediately, but especially him. And I want the restaurant to understand that I will be pursuing legal action for what happened here tonight." Ryan opened his mouth to respond, but Lauren wasn't finished. She had an audience now, and she knew how to use it. Her voice carried across the dining room, each word carefully chosen for maximum impact. "I came here tonight to have a business dinner with important clients. Instead, I was served incorrect food, and when I attempted to get a manager's attention, I was physically grabbed and restrained by a member of your staff. This is unacceptable. This is beyond unacceptable. This is criminal behavior, and I will not let it stand." A few of the diners began murmuring to each other. Ryan could see the doubt creeping into their faces. Lauren's version of events sounded plausible, even reasonable. She was the victim. He was the aggressor. And the fact that she was a well-dressed woman at an expensive restaurant made her story easy to believe. He was just a waiter, someone who could be replaced tomorrow, someone whose word meant nothing against hers. But then an older man at a nearby table stood up. He was probably in his 70s, dressed in a casual sweater and slacks, the kind of person who came to the grandeur because he genuinely enjoyed the food rather than to impress anyone. He cleared his throat, and when he spoke, his voice was firm and clear. "That's not what happened. I saw the whole thing. You were about to slap him and he stopped you. He didn't grab you aggressively. He just prevented you from hitting him." Lauren's face went pale, then flushed red again. She turned towards the older man, her voice sharp. "You're mistaken. You didn't see what happened clearly." But the older man didn't back down. He gestured toward his wife, who was still seated at their table. "My wife saw it too. We both did. You raised your hand to hit him, and he defended himself. That's not assault. That's self-defense." A younger couple at another table nodded in agreement. The woman held up her phone. "We recorded some of it. We can show you if you want." Lauren's confident expression flickered for just a moment, but she recovered quickly. She turned to her business associates, and one of them, the older man in the navy suit, stepped forward. His voice carried the kind of authority that came from decades of boardroom negotiations. "I saw what happened too, and I have to disagree with you, sir. What I witnessed was a staff member becoming physical with a customer. Mrs. Whitmore was simply trying to get someone's attention, and this waiter grabbed her. That's inappropriate regardless of the circumstances." The woman sitting at Lauren's table nodded vigorously, her expression sympathetic. The waiter's attitude was very confrontational from the start. He seemed angry when he brought out the food, like he was looking for a fight. Ryan felt the momentum shifting again. The room was dividing into camps. those who had seen what really happened and those who were willing to support Lauren's version either because they believed it or because they had their own reasons to side with wealth and power. Richard stood frozen, his eyes moving between the competing narratives, clearly calculating which version would cost the restaurant less in the long run. Lauren seemed to sense her advantage returning. She straightened her shoulders and addressed Richard directly, her voice cold and precise. "I want this man removed from the premises immediately, and I want a formal written apology from the restaurant by tomorrow morning. If I don't receive both of those things, I will contact my attorney and we will discuss what legal remedies are available for what happened here tonight." Richard nodded quickly, too quickly, and turned to Ryan. The look on the manager's face was apologetic but final. He had made his decision. "Ryan, you need to leave now. We'll sort this out tomorrow, but right now you're done for the evening." Ryan stood very still. This was it. The moment where he either accepted defeat and walked away, hoping that somehow things would work out tomorrow, or where he pushed back even harder and risked losing everything tonight. He thought about his son, about the morning when he would have to explain why Daddy didn't have a job anymore. He thought about all the times he had been told that survival meant keeping your head down, that fighting back was a luxury only privileged people could afford. But he also thought about what it would feel like to look his son in the eye and explain that sometimes, when someone tries to hurt you, you just have to let them. That some people get to hit you, and you're not allowed to stop them because they have more money or more power or more friends. He thought about what lesson that would teach a 7-year-old boy. Ryan pulled his phone out of his pocket. His hands were steady as he unlocked it and pulled up the keypad. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet but absolutely clear. "I want to see the security camera footage from tonight. I want to see what actually happened at this table. And if the restaurant refuses to show me, I'm calling the police right now and filing a report." The dining room went silent again. Lauren's confident expression faltered for the first time. Her eyes darted towards the ceiling, toward the discreet cameras mounted in the corners of the room, cameras that she had probably never noticed before because she had never needed to. Richard's face went pale. "Ryan, let's not escalate this. We can handle this internally tomorrow." Ryan kept his eyes on Lauren as he responded to Richard. He watched her face carefully, watched the way her certainty was beginning to crack around the edges. "No, this woman just accused me of assault. She said she's calling her lawyer. If that's the direction this is going, then I want evidence. I want everyone in this room to see exactly what happened. If I'm wrong, I'll accept whatever consequences come. But if I'm right, I want everyone to know it." Lauren's voice came out sharper than before, but there was something defensive in it now, something that hadn't been there a minute ago. "This is ridiculous. I don't need to prove anything. I'm the customer. I'm the one who was assaulted." Ryan took a step forward, not aggressive, but deliberate, his phone still in his hand. "Then you shouldn't have any problem with us checking the cameras. If your version is true, the video will show it. And if my version is true, the video will show that too. Either way, we'll have proof." He could see the fear starting to show in Lauren's eyes now, the realization that she might have overplayed her hand. She glanced at Richard, her voice taking on a different tone, something closer to pleading. "Look, this has gotten out of hand. Maybe we don't need to involve cameras or lawyers. I'm willing to accept an apology and move past this. Let's just forget the whole thing happened." Ryan shook his head slowly. His voice stayed calm, almost gentle, but there was steel underneath. "No, Mom. You just told everyone in this room that I assaulted you. You said you were calling your lawyer. You demanded I be fired. You can't take that back now just because you don't want to see the video. If you really believe I assaulted you, then let's look at the evidence. And if you don't want to look at the evidence, then maybe you know the evidence won't support your story." Richard looked between them, his face a mixture of terror and calculation. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll get the security footage." Richard disappeared toward his office while the dining room remained suspended in uncomfortable silence. Lauren returned to her seat, but didn't touch her food. Her business associates sat stiffly, exchanging glances that suggested they were reconsidering their association with her. The other diners pretended to return to their meals, but their attention remained fixed on table 12, waiting for the next act in a drama none of them had expected to witness on an ordinary Friday night. Ryan stood near the kitchen entrance, his arms at his sides, his breathing steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through his system. Sarah lingered nearby, her eyes red from crying, wringing her hands together. The minutes stretched out, each one feeling longer than the last. Ryan checked his watch. 5 minutes had passed since Richard left. Then 6, then 7. The longer they waited, the more he could see Lauren's confidence beginning to crack. She kept glancing toward the hallway, kept shifting in her chair, kept touching her hair and adjusting her jewelry in small, nervous gestures. When Richard finally emerged, he was carrying an iPad. His face was unreadable, carefully neutral in the way of someone who had just seen something he didn't want to deal with. He walked slowly toward table 12, and the entire restaurant seemed to lean forward collectively. Ryan didn't move from his position. He wanted everyone to see this, wanted there to be no question about what had happened. Richard set the iPad down on a nearby empty table and tapped the screen a few times. The video quality was better than Ryan had expected. The camera angle came from above and slightly to the side, capturing the entire table and the area around it in clear detail. Richard positioned the screen so that Lauren and her associates could see it, but also so that nearby tables had a view. Several diners stood up and moved closer, their curiosity overcoming their attempts at politeness. The video played without sound, but it didn't need any. The timestamp showed the moment about 10 minutes earlier when Ryan had approached table 12 with the Wagyu steak. He set it down carefully in front of Lauren. Her face changed immediately when she looked at the plate, her expression shifting from neutral to angry in the space of a heartbeat. Her mouth opened, clearly saying something sharp. Ryan's posture remained professional, his body language calm. He appeared to be trying to respond, to offer to check with the kitchen, but Lauren cut him off. Her gestures grew larger, more aggressive. Then she stood up. The video captured it perfectly. Lauren rising from her chair, her face flushed with anger, pointing at Ryan while her mouth moved rapidly. Her business associates watched her, their expressions uncomfortable. Other diners turned to look. Lauren's arm rose high, her hand open, moving in a clear arc toward Ryan's face. There was no ambiguity in the motion, no possibility of misinterpretation. She was preparing to slap him. And then Ryan's hand came up, not violently, not with any excess force, but with perfect timing. He caught her wrist mid-swing, stopping the motion before her hand could make contact with his face. His other hand remained at his side. He didn't grab her arm, didn't push her, didn't do anything except prevent the slap from landing. His mouth moved, speaking words the camera couldn't capture, but his expression was calm and controlled. After a few seconds, he released her wrist and stepped back. The silence in the grandeur was complete. No one spoke. No one moved. Every eye in the restaurant was fixed either on the iPad screen or on Lauren's face. Her expression had gone from confident to pale, her mouth slightly open, her eyes wide with the dawning realization that she had been caught in a lie. Not a small lie, not an exaggeration, but a complete fabrication that had just been disproven in front of dozens of witnesses. The older man who had spoken up earlier nodded firmly and looked at his wife. "That's exactly what I saw. Exactly." The young couple with the phone held up their screen, showing their own recording that matched the security footage perfectly. Other diners murmured in agreement, their voices low but carrying clearly in the shocked quiet. Lauren's business associate sat frozen, staring at the screen, then at her, then at each other. The older man in the navy suit stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I think we're done here, Lauren. We'll discuss the contract another time." He walked out without looking back. The woman who had supported Lauren earlier gathered her purse and followed him, her face carefully blank. The third associate remained seated for a moment longer, then shook his head slowly and left as well. Lauren sat alone at table 12, surrounded by empty chairs and half-finished meals, with the entire restaurant watching her unravel. Richard turned to Lauren, and for the first time that evening, his voice carried something other than deference. There was disappointment in it, and beneath that, anger at having been manipulated. "Mrs. Whitmore, I believe you owe Ryan an apology. You accused him of assault. The video clearly shows that he was defending himself from your attempt to strike him." Lauren's hands shook as she pressed them against the table. Her voice came out thin and strained, all the earlier authority completely gone. I didn't mean... I was upset about the meal and I lost my temper. I wasn't really going to hit him." Ryan stepped forward, his voice quiet but carrying clearly through the silent room. "The video shows otherwise, Ma'am, and even if you weren't going to follow through, you made the motion. You raised your hand to me, and when I stopped you, you tried to turn it around and make me the aggressor. You told everyone I assaulted you. You said you were calling your lawyer. You demanded I be fired." Lauren looked up at him, and for the first time, Ryan saw something genuine in her expression. Not anger, not calculation, but actual shame. She seemed smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of what she had tried to do, and failed. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I'm sorry, I was wrong. I shouldn't have tried to hit you, and I shouldn't have lied about what happened." Ryan looked at her for a long moment. He could see that she meant it, that the humiliation of being exposed in front of everyone had broken through whatever armor of privilege she usually wore. But he also knew that this apology wasn't enough, that words spoken under pressure didn't erase what she had tried to do. "I accept that you lost your temper about the meal, but I don't accept that you tried to make me the villain when I defended myself. Money doesn't give you the right to humiliate people. Position doesn't give you the right to touch them, and when someone stops you from hurting them, you don't get to twist that into an attack." He spoke without raising his voice, without any trace of triumph or revenge, but every word landed with quiet force. Lauren nodded slowly, unable to meet his eyes. She stood up, her movements stiff and mechanical, and reached for her purse. She pulled out several large bills and left them on the table, far more than the meal would have cost. Then she walked toward the exit, her heels clicking against the floor in the otherwise silent restaurant. No one tried to stop her. No one said goodbye. When the door closed behind her, the spell broke. The dining room exhaled collectively, conversations resuming in low, excited tones. But before the noise could build, a single person began to clap. It was the older man who had first defended Ryan. His applause started slow and deliberate, and within seconds, others joined in. The sound built gradually, not into wild cheering or celebration, but into something more measured and meaningful. It was the sound of respect, of witnessing someone stand up for themselves and win not through aggression, but through simple, stubborn dignity. Richard approached Ryan, his expression a mixture of relief and genuine remorse. He extended his hand, and Ryan shook it. "I'm sorry I didn't support you from the beginning. You were right to ask for the video, and you're right about everything else too. Your job is safe, more than safe. I think we need to have a conversation about some policy changes around here." Sarah appeared at Ryan's side, tears streaming down her face again, but this time from relief rather than fear. She wrapped her arms around him in a quick, grateful hug. "Thank you. You didn't just stand up for yourself. You stood up for all of us, for everyone who's ever had to smile and take it when someone treats us like we're nothing." Ryan returned the hug briefly, then gently stepped back. He was exhausted suddenly, the adrenaline draining away and leaving him feeling hollow and tired. He wanted to go home, to check on his son, to leave this entire night behind. But first, he needed to finish his shift. There were still tables to clear, orders to take, guests to serve. The work didn't stop just because something dramatic had happened. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Customers approached Ryan throughout the night, some to shake his hand, others to tell him their own stories of times they wished they had stood up for themselves but hadn't. The tips that night were extraordinary, people leaving extra 20s and 50s with notes of support and encouragement. But Ryan barely noticed. He moved through his duties mechanically, his mind already at home. When his shift finally ended, just after 11 o'clock, Ryan changed out of his work clothes and walked out into the cool night air. The streets were quiet, the city settling into its late-night rhythm. He pulled out his phone and saw a text from his neighbor, who watched his son on Friday nights. "He's sound asleep. Take your time." Ryan typed back a quick thank you and headed home. The apartment was dark when he arrived. He moved quietly through the rooms, checking locks and turning off lights, the familiar routine grounding him after the chaos of the evening. When he reached his son's bedroom, he pushed the door open gently and stood in the doorway, watching the small figure curled up under the blankets, breathing deeply in sleep. Ryan sat down carefully on the edge of the bed, reached out, and smoothed his son's hair back from his forehead. The boy stirred slightly, but didn't wake. Ryan kept his hand there for a moment, feeling the warmth of his child's head, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. Then he leaned down and whispered, so quietly that even if the boy had been awake, he might not have heard. "I hope someday you'll understand. Standing up for what's right is always worth it, even when it's scary, especially when it's scary." He kissed his son's forehead, stood up slowly, and walked out of the room, leaving the door cracked open the way his son liked it. Tomorrow he would wake up and make breakfast and help with homework and go back to work. But tonight he had drawn a line that needed drawing, and he had shown his son, even if the boy didn't know it yet, that dignity wasn't something you could buy or sell or take from someone who refused to give it up.
Thank you for listening to this story until the end. Hopefully every moment, every detail in the story has brought you emotions, thoughts, and maybe a little joy or motivation. Thank you for spending time with us, and hope that the next stories will continue to accompany you and touch your heart.